Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 75 and I am the show's host Kyle. In today's show I'm going to be focusing on the Middle East and specifically the war and proxy wars fought between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the relationship between the two countries and how the relationship with the United States factors into everything going on in the Middle East. As always, if this is something that you or a friend of yours or just anybody is interested in, please share this show. You can find the show at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. That's the website for the show. You could also find it at Kyle's Files on Facebook. Files is spelled F-Y-L-E-S, and it's just Kyle's Files. There you'll find all my news roundups, all my shows, all the great information that I'm putting out is always on my Facebook page, and I recommend everybody goes to it, likes it, and shares from it. Those kind of things really do make a difference, and if we want to make a difference and take down and, maybe reduce the chance of war by informing some people of what's really going on in the world, then please share the show, and now I'm going to get right into it. So I guess the first place to start is there's a split between Saudi Arabia and Iran in the Middle East, although you could really count in maybe the UAE and Bahrain in with the split in the Middle East. Qatar, Kuwait, and Oman seem at least a little bit less hostile towards Iran than the other three GCC countries, although typically ones brought up on TV are just in, popular conversation is Saudi Arabia versus Iran, not Saudi Arabia and the UAE versus Iran, although it does seem that the UAE is playing a bigger and bigger role in international affairs and is more of an ally of the United States in the Middle East as time has moved on. And so I think when analyzing the situation or when reading news about the situation, you at least have to acknowledge that the UAE is playing a bigger role in Middle East affairs, especially in the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The typical way the split is brought up is it's a Sunni-Shia split, with the Iranians being the Shia and the Saudi Arabias being the Sunnis. The royal family of Saudi Arabia believes in and supports a branch of Sunni Islam known as Wahhabism. This is also the branch of Islam that is kind of the foundation for some of the thought in the jihadist ideology. So not necessarily everybody who believes in Wahhabi Islam is a jihadist. However, most jihadists come from that school of thought. Saudi Arabia, for their effort, tries to spread this ideology around the Middle East, either by arming militias in places like Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, and even Afghanistan, or by funding community centers, mosques, churches, whatever. So if a U.S. airstrike comes in and blows up your church, likely what will happen is a Saudi donor or a member of the Saudi royal family, or even the Saudi government itself on a humanitarian mission, will come in and build a nice church and then install somebody there who, is going to preach the Wahhabi faith. They also utilize, community centers, markets, whatever they could build as a public good, and then they invite people in and spread their ideology that way. There's a very well documented article on this that I read not too long ago about how Saudi Arabia has spread some Wahhabi Islam through Afghanistan in this way. Iran does the same thing to some extent. They definitely try to come in and help Shia communities, especially with weapons. If you look at Syria and Iraq being the best example of the Iranians really doing what they can to protect the minority Shia Muslims there, or even majority Shia Muslims there, and defend them against, ISIS extremists or what have you. Also Lebanon with the support of Hezbollah, and then in Israel with the support of Hamas. Looking at the two countries, Saudi Arabia is a straight-up religious monarchy passed down from generation to generation. The next leader of Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince bin Salman, is himself the son of the right now King bin Salman, and so, like I said, the torch will be passed down through bloodline there. The next leader, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, right now seems to be pretty much the current leader. As his father is old, I think not all there mentally. I've heard people throw around, terms like Alzheimer's, dementia, or just a lack of ability to really have any memory. I don't think, the Saudi Arabia officially admits that their king is unable to, actually lead a country, but I think the effective situation is really that his son is ruling the country and controlling most everything. Of course, his son is a recent appointment to be crown prince. Before there was another man, another member of the House Saud family, that was planning on becoming the next king of Saudi Arabia, but he was replaced. Rumors say that he had a drug addiction, but there's really no confirmation on that, and it may have just been a nepotism thing as to why he was replaced. Iran is like a constitutional, religious part government and then a part democratically elected government. The Ayatollah of Iran, I think right now, the Ayatollah is a pretty hardliner, a very, anti-Saudi Arabia, anti-US kind of person, where the president who at least has more diplomatic power on an international stage was able to do things like force through the P5+1 deal in Iran, which was a nuclear weapons deal with the United States, is a little bit more powerful and is much more moderate right now. That is Rouhani. I just saw a funny article about some ridiculous person in the mainstream media was complaining about Rouhani moving towards the hardliners. Of course, this writer fails to mention that Rouhani was in Iran were just sanctioned by the United States, and that, whenever a country attacks yours, you have to kind of respond to your people. And so the United States mainstream media, complete inability to ever look at anything from the perspective of anybody but an American government official, it is so unbelievable. That is constantly shocking to me. Every time I read one of these articles, I laugh about it, but at the same time, it's like all the things Americans say about Americans being, conceited and only thinking about themselves, and then you have this elite class of, enlightened people, they like to call themselves, in the mainstream media, but really they're the exact same. All they could do, the only perspective they ever have is the perspective of the American government and the interest of the American government and corporations, and not even the interest of the American people. But back to the overall purpose of this episode, which is Iran versus Saudi Arabia. And what we do see in Iran is that the at least the majority of the population that votes prefers a moderate to a hardliner. Kind of on the face of it, if you look at Saudi Arabia and Iran and look at the very strict religious ideology that is imposed onto the people of Saudi Arabia versus how people in Iran live, Iran is a much more similar country to the United States than Saudi Arabia is. Yes, they have a religious leader. Yes, they have religious laws. However, you could be in Iran, you can exist as somebody of a faith outside of Islam. In Saudi Arabia, that just isn't possible. I mean, right now, Saudi Arabia has executed Shia minority leaders. Right now, they're bulldozing a Shia majority town, and so really, they just pick on the Shiites in their country. And for that reason, it's always kind of surprised me that more people haven't questioned the United States' commitment and faith to the relationship with Saudi Arabia versus Iran. Really, the United States' relationship with Iran, or at least it seems to me, kind of went downhill during Clinton and Bush. Bush, of course, putting Iran within the axis of evil. So now I kind of just want to go through all the places around the Middle East where we see the clashes between Saudi Arabia and Iran, what side each country has interest on, how all that works. So I think the best and one of the most clear examples of this is Syria, and really we could kind of pair up Syria and Iraq, but there's a few things in the history I want to go over with Iraq anyway. So Syria. Iran bats Assad, Hezbollah fights with Russia and the Shia militias. They mostly seem to fight against ISIS and then the Al-Qaeda linked rebels. Right now, Russia does have a ceasefire deal in several areas of Syria where there are actual moderate rebels, so the Assad forces are not attacking the moderate rebels. However, anywhere there's ISIS or Al-Qaeda, the ceasefires are off, and the Syrian government, Iran, and Russia are all carrying out strikes and attacks against those groups. A lot of people will credit Russia with the kind of saving Assad from being overthrown, especially as the kind of ISIS and Al-Qaeda were growing and marching towards Damascus before Russia stepped in. But all along, Iran has fought alongside of Assad, and I think everybody should be very happy about this. As much as I don't like war and oppose war, looking at who the big players are among the rebel groups right now, and it's either ISIS or Al-Qaeda, you have to say, well, we kind of dodged a bullet, because if Assad was overthrown, then it would have been ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And so Iran, as along with their proxy group Hezbollah, have done a lot of work to fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Saudi Arabia pretty much bats Al-Qaeda in Syria, and that's the most honest way to say it. I'm sure that Saudi Arabia does give weapons to members of the rebel groups who are not Al-Qaeda jihadist-linked people, but most of the people who are getting the weapons are the jihadist-linked people, and those who aren't are either selling them to the jihadists or getting them taken from them from the jihadists. Saudi Arabia has funneled tow missiles from the United States and man-pads through Saudi Arabia to Syria, and it fell into the hands of Al-Qaeda-linked groups. In the private Facebook group Foreign Policy Focus, a listener actually asked if I knew if the United States or Saudi Arabia directly armed Al-Zinki, the terror group Al-Zinki, with man-pads. Through the reporting of World Porter, we do know that they definitely got tow missiles, which are the super advanced anti-tank missiles that really turned the tides of the war in a lot of ways. I think Assad was really rolling through them with his tanks because the rebels obviously don't have an air force. And then it was these tow missiles that were able to take out Assad's tanks that allowed the ISIS and Al-Qaeda rebels to start really making some ground against Assad. And, the conclusion to the question of, did the United States or Saudi Arabia arm Al-Zinki? The answer is, as far as we could tell, we're not sure. There's definitely arming of Al-Qaeda groups, and, we're pretty confident Al-Zinki was receiving weapons, as part of a coalition that was, like a Free Syrian Army coalition through the CIA program. At the time, they were giving out man-pads, but it's not, they didn't tell us that they gave those man-pads to Al-Zinki. Trump, for his part, does seem to be changing the U.S. policy here a little bit and starting to side at least against Saudi Arabia and the rebels in Iraq and Syria a little bit. That isn't to say the United States is switching sides and then supporting Iran. Prior to this, the United States has been actively fighting against Iran, Assad, and the Hezbollah-backed Shia militias under Obama and through Trump's presidency, and finally that kind of policy is changing a little bit. It does seem like Iran is getting the upper hand on Saudi Arabia in Syria. It looks like at the end of the day, the path will be clear for Iran to have a straight landline to Lebanon and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And Assad will ultimately win out in the civil war, at least between himself and the rebel groups, the Kurdish factions outstanding, and what role Turkey plays in the future of Syria. Moving to Iraq, going back to the kind of 1990s and maybe even 1980s, we have Saddam not really being an ally of Saudi Arabia, but the enemy of, but Saddam Hussein was the enemy of Iraq and the Kuwaitis. I'm sorry, Saddam Hussein was the enemy of Iran, not Iraq. Iran fought against Saddam and Iraq during these eras, and really fought against Saddam all the way up until Saddam was taken out of power by the United States. Through the United States' second war in Iraq and then the 2007 surge, the United States basically had conducted a power change in the capital city of Baghdad by kicking out all the Shia or Sunnis and allowing all the Shias to move in. This basically was a kind of an ethnic cleansing campaign. It was very dirty, disgusting, and awful. It's kind of the worst of the things that probably the U.S. has done in the Middle East. But what this effectively did is move Baghdad and Iraq closer to Iran over Saudi Arabia. For the first time, kind of opened up that land bridge between Tehran and Hezbollah, and it was a huge win for Iran, absolutely. And I think that may be one of the best kept secrets, actually, of the second Iraq war, is that Iran was a real winner of the second Iraq war. Iran got more powerful. Iran got a new ally. Iran was able to ship weapons to Hezbollah. And so kind of looking at the past of Iraq, you kind of see what's happened there, and Iran's gained a little bit of an upper hand. ISIS seemingly had some support from Saudi Arabia and were able to make a lot of gains against the Iraqi government in, 2012, 2013, 2014 as ISIS gained power and took, Mosul, Ramadi, Tikrit, Fallujah. Right now it looks like the Shia militias, largely backed by Iran and even at sometimes the United States. Funny how on the other side of the border from Syria, the United States is now fighting on Iran's side against Saudi Arabia. The Iranian Ba'ath militias are now, I think, pushing towards Tel Afar and are looking to kind of kit the last of ISIS out of Iraq or at least, as far as them controlling territory and not just being an insurgent group. Iraq, again, right now, it looks like things are drifting towards Iran as that, they've maintained a lot of stability and are connecting up with their Shia militia partners on the Syrian side of the border now. In Yemen, we have Saudi Arabia waging a very expensive and very long war against the Houthi rebels in northern Yemen. At the start of the war, Iran really only provided the Houthis with some minor training. I guess Iran smuggled some Houthis out to South Lebanon so they could train with Hezbollah for a time and learn some strategies. But as far as arming or supporting the Houthis in that way, that really hasn't happened until very recently. Saudi Arabia has been fighting against the Houthis on the side of the Yemeni government. However, the Yemeni army ended up on the side of the Houthis in this war, and so Saudi Arabia has really had to resort to backing the UAE forces, militia groups, Sudanese mercenaries, and even Al-Qaeda to fight in the war against the Houthis in northern Yemen. It seems to me that Iran has come to the realization that in a very cost-effective measure, they could provide some arms and support to the Houthis and really bleed Saudi Arabia dry. Saudi Arabia is spending $200 million a day on this war. It looks like Iran at best is spending, a ship full of AK-47s or some sniper rifles or light arms like that. The war's really been fought to a stalemate. Saudi Arabia has fought such a bloody war. I think that any chance of their government taking power is pretty close to nothing. One of the groups who has been winning in Yemen has been Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which is, of course, the most dangerous, or it was labeled the most dangerous jihadist group in the world. Jonathan Marshall wrote an excellent article that I think ran in Consortium News, if you want to check that out, kind of going over how the policy of the United States helping Saudi Arabia's war is really helping Al-Qaeda there. While Al-Qaeda in that way, Saudi Arabia is making some territorial gains in Yemen. Overall, Saudi Arabia is spending a lot more money for anything they're getting in Yemen right now. The war is kind of being fought to a stalemate. And Iran seems kind of intent to just put in enough, put in enough weapons to, keep the fight going. From what I'm able to read and find out about the region, it doesn't seem like Iran is sending the Houthis a lot of weapons. I guess it's really hard for Iran to smuggle weapons to the Houthis because everybody around Iran and everybody in between Iran and the Houthis are on the opposite side of this war. Looking at Hezbollah, which is pretty much an Iranian proxy force. I guess Hezbollah has the ability to do what they want. They do see themselves kind of as protectors of some of the Palestinians in Israel. They have fought against the Israelis themselves and actually repelled an Israeli attack. They've seemed to have gained a lot of fighting experience fighting in Syria against the ISIS forces there. Iran, like I said, has, really benefited from gaining Iraq as an ally and being able to better arm Hezbollah for that reason. Overall, countries like Saudi Arabia list Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, will occasionally have rhetoric against Hezbollah. Up to the time of the Syrian civil war, I'm not sure how often Hezbollah fought against Sunni rebels. It seems to be more of a relatively new thing that came, like I said, with the Syrian war, maybe even the Iraq war, starting with the Iranian militias helping the U.S. fight off some of the insurgents there. In Israel, Iran supports Hamas and the Palestinians, and Saudi Arabia now seems to have allied themselves with Israel. I think this is a nuance that most Americans probably don't know about. I think everybody assumes that the Israelis hate the Muslims and the Muslims hate the Israelis. This really isn't the case. Saudi Arabia gets along with them pretty well. Even if they're, jihadist bad fighters although it's even been shown that Israel will provide support to the jihadists in order to try to take down the Iranians. And then finally, we have the Qatar situation. I'm not going to go through it again. I've done on several different shows, so if you're interested, I'll link to one of those shows in the show notes. However, as I analyzed, I believe 2 shows ago on Foreign Policy Focus 73, what's kind of happening is that Saudi Arabia is being shown as weak. Qatar's been able to move closer to Iran, so in that way, Iran's getting a little bit more powerful. Qatar's been able to resist Saudi Arabia's demands, thinking that they could just bully the small country around. And so it really looks like, even and Qatar, the Iranians are gaining a little bit of the upper hand on the Saudis. I think one of the differences, and one of the reasons that maybe the Iranians has at least a more recent success than the Saudis in the Middle East in their kind of proxy wars and battles, is just because rather than trying to create situations like Saudi Arabia, is like they're trying to create an overthrow in Yemen, they're trying to overthrow Assad in Syria. Iran's kind of just looking to hold on to kind of what they got and then, take advantage of opportunities that fall in their lap like Iraq. And so I think it's really the aggressiveness of Saudi Arabia's foreign policy looking to arm jihadists and fund jihadists everywhere that's caused a lot of problems. Also, their relationship with the United States probably isn't the most popular thing in the Middle East, as well as their relationship with Israel. Also, the groups that Saudi Arabia is backing over the Iranians are just worse. I mean, Hezbollah is not ISIS, and the United States needs to come to that realization. I mean, Hezbollah is no longer even really a guerrilla military force, or kind of the modern day fighting militia force that the Middle East has to offer, and I don't think that the United States really needs to fear terrorist attacks from Hezbollah. Maybe, there could be a military conflict that's certainly not off the table, especially with the United States being willing and Israel being willing to bomb Hezbollah in Syria. Alright, so that wraps up that portion of the show for today. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I would like to run through some news stories that I think are significant and just touch on them. I know it's kind of already been a while in the show, so this probably won't be a super long portion. First story, Trump says U.S. and Russian relations are at an all-time low. I guess, maybe you could say this, although I do think they were worse under Obama. Obama and Putin really didn't seem to like each other. Trump and Putin do. I think when two leaders get along, the potential for an upside, is a lot more there, even if they aren't, the most stable guys in the world. So overall, this is a bad thing. This is a really bad thing. These are a lot of H-bombs pointing at each other, and other than maybe Pakistan, India is, the most dangerous flashpoint in the world to have a nuclear war. So keep our eyes on it. Let's keep debunking these myths that Russia hacked the election. Some of the conspiracy theories are coming up with now are just ridiculous to me. So hopefully one day we could debunk this stuff. Trump says that the U.S. is losing in Afghanistan and wants to fire General Nicholson, I think is his name, the commander of forces in Afghanistan. I think Madison Kelly tried to assure Trump that, hey, don't fire him. He's not bad. He's doing his job. However, from Trump's point of view, we're losing Afghanistan. So if the guy in charge is losing, then he should lose his job. It'll be interesting to see what happens here. It seems like right now there's two options on the table, and that's leave or go after the minerals. Trump has signed the sanctions bill, and that's created some tensions with Russia, of course, and that, that's why Trump said that relations are at an all-time low. Disappointing to see. I would have liked to see Trump veto it just to get everybody to then cast a ballot against it again. Of course, the sanctions bill also hit Iran and North Korea, and that's creating problems with those countries as well. Former military investigator Mark Fallon, who once investigated the Guantanamo Bay facilities in prison, is saying that the Pentagon is preventing him from publishing a book on the issue. Fallon says that the book contains no classified information and just exposes the people who advocated for torture and kind of how they end run around and were able to get this done. The Pentagon says that so many departments need to review the book that it's just taking that long, but it's been already, I think, 7 months. We have several Senate confirmations for foreign policy related posts. Kay Hutchinson, former Texas Republican senator, says that pro-NATO, has been named the ambassador to NATO. She's pro-NATO expansion and pro-Israel. Richard Johnson, owner of the Jets and longtime supporter of the GOP, has been named the ambassador to the UK. He was a supporter of Jeb to start, so I thought that was an interesting appointment. George Glass, a longtime GOP donor, owner of some apartment buildings, and one-time visitor of Portugal, has been named the ambassador to Portugal. Louis Eisenberg has been appointed to the envoy of Italy in San Marino, and Jamie McCourt has been named the envoy to France and Monaco. Other kind of personnel moves that McMaster has now fired 3 Trump loyalists from the National Security Council. That is General Harvey, Rich Higgins, and Ezra Cohen. The U.S. test launched an ICBM, I think it was a Minuteman II missile, as a show of force, mostly I think directed towards North Korea, especially that since the direction the missile went. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee approved a bill to cut Palestinian aid. A lot of this aid was going to Palestinians, I guess, who lost their either husbands or sons or maybe even wives, either in fighting with Israel or imprisoned by the Israelis. So these are people who lost the breadwinner of their home. The senators are cutting the aid, saying that unless the Palestinians remove that, then they're not going to reinstate it. Kristen Gillibrand, senator from New York, has withdrawn her name from the bill that would make it kind of illegal to promote the BDS movement. That's boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Qatar signed a deal with Italy to buy 7 warships for $6 billion. Iran responds to U.S. sanctions, saying that the sanctions violate the P5+1 deal, and they have a 16-part plan to combat the U.S. sanctions. News out of Libya. Italy approved a measure to move Italian naval ships into Libya waters to stem the flow of refugees. Haftar responds by asking Libyan naval forces to intercept the ships. In Afghanistan, Doctors Without Borders has opened their first medical facility in Kunduz, Afghanistan, for the first time since 2015. The last time there was a Doctors Without Borders hospital there, it was destroyed by an American gunship that strafed the doctors as they ran away. Of course, Doctors Without Borders has long been upset about the U.S. response to this and the failure to hold anybody responsible in any way. In Syria, the United States warns that if Al-Qaeda takes over the Idlib province, there will be grave consequences. I'm not sure who maybe they're warning to try to stop the takeover of the Idlib province. Right now, there's a somewhat ceasefire going on between Russia and the rebels in the Idlib province, and Russia's agreeing not to attack the Al-Qaeda-linked rebels. However, the United States says that if Al-Qaeda takes the whole thing over, Russia and Syria will just bomb the place like they were before. Of course, the articles that you read this in and the U.S. government itself provide no context and say, hey, we're the ones that armed all the Al-Qaeda rebels and gave them the weapons they needed to take over the Idlib province in the first place. In a speech, Tillerson announced that the U.S. is looking for a future of Syria without Assad, of course reiterating this ridiculous statement that Assad must go, and pretending like the U.S. has any say in the matter anyways. Russia has announced a new de-escalation zone near Homs where they're agreeing not to attack the moderate rebels. And finally, in Venezuela, we have a voting machine saying the voting machine company that provide the voting machines for the election say that the results were off by at least 1 million. So I'm not sure what at least 1 million means. Does that mean like 1 to 2 million, or does that mean it could be 1 million, it could be 7 million? It does seem like the results are probably a little bit closer than I indicated on the show last time and that the opposition was saying in Venezuela. So I apologize for that mistake, and as always, I try to correct my mistakes on the show. I don't want to give anybody false information and not correct it. So that'll wrap up my show for today. I hope everybody liked the show. I'll be back next week with a set of new shows. If you enjoy the show, please share the show at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or going to my Facebook page, Kyle's Files. While you're on Facebook, you go to Foreign Policy Focus and search for the private Facebook group and click there, ask questions, talk to me and several other group members about foreign policy stuff. It's a fun place. My Twitter is at KYAAALE. My website is kylesfilesblog.com, and I also blog at thelibertarianinstitute.org. Have a good weekend, everyone.